everybody. Dr. Tracey Adams here, and I want to welcome you to our EQ Lab lecture. Many of my students have been asking me and requesting that I record the lecture from my EQ Labs. And so here it is, my very first time recording the lecture from one of our topics. Every week we get together as a community, as a women's community in these labs, and we go deeper in emotional intelligence. And I bring forth topics that are neuroscience based, and we spend most of our time in smaller groups practicing the skills. Now, I always start my labs with a 10-minute lecture around what we're going to do, and then I teach the skill. We go into a breakout room. We usually practice more of a discovery session, and then we come back as a group. We debrief what that's about, and then we go back in for a deeper dive. So today I want to share, first of all, I'm taping this for my cohort and my students, but I'm also going to bring it forward into the women that subscribe to my newsletters, because I know a lot of you want to follow and practice emotional intelligence. So here's our very first EQ Lab, not live, but taped lecture. And you can try to get on the court and practice some of these skills in emotional intelligence. So this last Friday was one of my favorite topics, and we called it moving through shame. And I've been doing some deeper work myself around holding on to cultural shame. And what's coming up for me is, I've been raising children. I've been a solo parent for the last 13 years. And some of you know that follow my work. I started dating at the start of the summer. I decided that I want to practice some skills of dating. And I've actually built a class on the emotional intelligence of dating. I can't wait to roll that out because I've learned so much. But one of the things that I have been rumbling around with inside myself is just what kind of relationship I want. And there's a lot of shame coming up. Personal shame around not wanting to be married and wanting a different container for what a relationship would look like with someone else. And it's hard as a woman. I'm sandwiched between a generation that really believed that marriage was the only model, a monogamous marriage was the only model. And then my kids' generation, that they have many different ideas of relationships and sexuality for sure. And in my new class, I have a whole module just on sexuality. But where I've been thinking and what I've been thinking is just shame, the feeling of shame I get when I start to talk about the kind of relationship I want. So here is the lecture. Here's the lecture when we went into the depths of shame. And that was just one example. I have many, many examples of where I find shame in my life. And when you think about relationships in general, some of us do carry shame in them. So I started my lecture. I start all my lectures with the reminder that this work really is about being in relationship with yourself, right? Emotional intelligence is your ability to facilitate your own mind. We facilitate our thoughts, feelings, and actions at the same time. Many of my colleagues in the scheme of emotional intelligence talk about it in terms of relationship management. That is a byproduct of emotional intelligence. But what EQ really is the journey to yourself, right? It's really understanding who you are, how you tick. I talk a lot about identity, shaping who you are, and really being confident in your ability to state who you are and how you think, feel, and what you want to another person. Most of the women I interact with and I work with are from the corporate sector, but I do have a lot of women that come to this work in many, many, many different situations. So what does shame have to do with who you are? So I set up the lecture in just identifying the origins of shame, and not so much from a construct or from a feeling, but how we're shaped into the feeling as children. And I talk about shame being on a continuum of self-orientation, right? So if you're on this side of the continuum and you're shame-based, usually we come from families where we were isolated and we're very self-obsessed or self-absorbed, right? If we were isolated as children, maybe we were only children, maybe we were latchkey kids, where we had to be self-reliant, we tend to be perfectionists and we tend to be very shame-oriented. Where if you look at the other side of the polarity, if I talk to you about like people who are other-oriented, or they go to high anger very quickly rather than shame, they might have been raised in families with a lot of chaos, right? Because they're always looking around, is mom and dad going to be upset? They tend to come from alcoholic homes, right? A lot of chaos. And so shame is not something that they necessarily carry, but they do sometimes carry anger at the other, where you could be self-angered, right? Like I'm shame-oriented because I'm thinking about myself. I'm self-oriented, or I'm other-oriented. I look to someone else for the cause of my distress. So I set that up as a way to just for us to think about our family of origin and where this feeling comes from. And so in the lab, we reviewed our awareness wheel. We got on that awareness wheel that I talk a lot about. It's that model of when we get information about something, what's our thoughts, feelings, and wants about it before we move into action. We were going to unpack shame together as a cohort, and then we're going to use empathy to move forward. And so that's what we did in our lab. And we do all of this work around well-being, right? Those of you who follow my work know that there are 4 main areas that I talk about with emotional intelligence, the places that as women we step into our power. And that's through a powerful career, a purpose. We have a purpose-driven life. We manage our finances well. We embrace money. We talk about money. We wield our money. We command our money. Our social intelligence, meaning how we build intimacy with others and how we parent our children. And then physical self-care, how we take care of our bodies, drink lots of water, sleep, all that radical self-care that I teach in my cohort, in my curriculum. And then we do this through support and through community. So this is the awareness wheel. And I always start my labs reminding us that what we do when we're in smaller groups is we're really identifying our thoughts, feelings, and wants, our stories, our feelings, what we want about it before we move into action. And if you're interested in going deeper, you can certainly join any one of my classes, because this is where I discuss emotional intelligence. So what is shame? Shame is that painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by our thinking that we did something wrong, basically. But the way I describe shame is an acute feeling that I'm not enough. This is what I walk around with all the time. So when I say that I'm self-oriented and I'm shame-based, what I'm saying is that I often, as a recovering perfectionist, walk around thinking like, I'm not enough. I'm not thin enough. I'm not rich enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not young enough. I'm not powerful enough. I'm not doing enough at work. I'm not saying the right things. I mean, these are like subtle things that go on in my mind throughout the day. And I have found that emotional intelligence has been the cure for shame. It really has. My ability to facilitate my mind and know when things are just boogeymen. I told the ladies on Friday that oftentimes the things in my mind is just the boogeyman under my bed, right? They're not real. Shame is a definite feeling, but they come from the stories that we're making up in our minds. And sometimes those stories are wrong. I also set this lab up with some pre-work. There's a really great Brene Brown video where she describes the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is when you feel bad because you've done something wrong. And shame is where I'm bad because I'm the culprit, right? I'm not worthy of feeling good. Like I'm not worthy of my humanness, right? We all make mistakes. And that intense feeling that we're not good enough is alive and well in many of the women that come through my workshop. And so moving through shame is really, really important. So the feelings of shame are, there's many different feelings. And in the work of emotional intelligence, what I teach is to have a wide vocabulary of emotion. Right? Emotional agility means that you have a wide vocabulary of your emotions. And as women and as men, we're not taught emotional vocabulary. as children, we are not taught this. And so part of our work now as adults is learning how to feel, what those feelings are, knowing that those feelings are not facts about who we are, right? They're just feelings and they're just energy. And so how do you then move through shame? So this is the activity that we did in our lab, and I'm going to pass it on to all of you so that you can practice as well. You're going to find someone that you can share with, right? A personal, a friend or a colleague. And what we talk about in my labs is where we get on the court. Right? If you're going to go learn how to play tennis, you don't read it from a book. You actually have to go and practice. So I have every Friday, we get on the court and we break up into smaller groups and we practice these skills. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to share your shame story with someone. And what Brené Brown talks about is shame dissipates in the light. Right? Shame dissipates when we share it with really safe people. So in the container of our work together is about practicing empathy. And so this is the practice of moving through shame. You share your shame story with someone, and then they practice empathy back to you. I will point out that in one of my modules in my Step Into Your Power class, I do a whole thing about how do you share your shame story? How do you share about those stories that are very tender to you and your ability to pick a very safe person? And in my classes, the safety that we create when we do emotional intelligence is we do not give people advice, right? We do not. We use a different model of listening in the work of emotional intelligence, because when you give someone advice who is shame oriented, it makes them feel like they didn't do it right. And they're already trying to recover from that, right? So you never, ever give advice. That's the norm I always set up when we do this deeper work together. So what we did is we got into small groups of 2. One woman shared her tender story, and then the other woman shared her tender story. And then we came back as a cohort and just talked about how that felt. Now, because I have this norm of no advice giving, most of the women in my lab feel refreshed. They feel like some woman said this is therapeutic, because when do you really get the opportunity to share and be witnessed, no matter what you are feeling in the most tender, embarrassing, shameful moments? Very rarely do you have those people in your life. So I try to create that in my community and my labs. So the skill or the tool that we use then is that the second woman that hears your story does this 3-step model. They first restate what they heard in terms of how they thought you felt. So my example that I gave on Friday was I was in a work meeting. My boss, who was so horrible, this man was such a horrible boss. He had no empathy at all. And he was very shame-based as well, perfectionistic. He yelled at me during an offsite. And he shot a look across the room and basically yelled at me. It was diminishing, discounting, very unprofessional, very inappropriate. And I remember being completely stunned that I was an adult PhD in this company, and he would do that in front of my colleagues. And so that was the story that I shared. And even just sharing it right now, I feel all kinds of shame in my gut from it. It was really a horrible, horrible experience that I experienced. And so by sharing that with my partner, then what she did is she just reinstated what she heard. And she said, Tracey, wow, that I can imagine I would be angry and I would feel embarrassed and I'd almost feel shocked. And what she was doing here is she was just naming the feelings that I must have been feeling, right? Which is so validating. Ladies, it's so validating to be witnessed like this, right? We don't fix them. She didn't say, oh, Tracey, that's all him. He's an ass, right? She didn't say any of that. She didn't say, oh, you shouldn't feel that way or you're better than him. No, she didn't. She just completely witnessed my shame, right? And she didn't try to fix it or solve it. She witnessed my feelings and she gave other labels for those feelings. And then she moved into the final step, which is sharing a time when she had those feelings too. Now, she didn't have to share that she had a bad boss as well. All she had to do was share, hey, I've had that happen to me before. I've been in public where someone has discounted me like that, or I've been at work where I've had that happen, and it just does not feel good. And I just know how that feels. Wow. Like it washed the shame away. Like it just washes that feeling away from you when you can be heard and have someone empathize like that. So in our lab, we came back after that second round and we got to share what that felt like. It was an amazing, amazing experience, right? The first time we did it, we felt liberated, we felt witnessed, we felt validated. And the second time, we got to wash that shame away from us. And so, ladies, that's how we move through shame, is by using empathy and connection. And so the next time you're hearing someone that might be feeling shame or they might be embarrassed, use this 3-step process. Now, I will add a 4th step here to say, when you're done, identifying, then you give them the ball back and say, hey, I want to know, how did you deal with it? Like, what happened since then? Or tell me a little bit more. Like, give them really the ball, since you're the person listening. That would be the 4th step that I would add. But really holding that space for that person helps them move through shame. So with that, my friends, that is your practice. So I want you to get on the court, give it a try, and then for those of you who want to come into my labs, you know where to find me. I want you to practice and tell me how it goes. You send me an email and let me know how your practice in emotional intelligence is going. So with that, thrive on, and we'll see you next time.